Hey, everybody, it's Scott McGillivray here, and this is my podcast, The Real Estate Rebel. And I have been waiting to do this topic for a long time. So I'm super pumped, and I mean, it's almost impossible not to want to hear the information that I'm going to divulge today, because the topic is how I made $500,000 by mistake, and there's no reason why you shouldn't put yourself in the same position to make that mistake. And realistically, you should be doing it on purpose. And full transparency, I've also done this on purpose many times after the first time doing it by mistake, which gives you an idea of how lucrative this interesting situation might be. So stick around. I am going to get into the list of things that you need to do to make this same lucrative mistake yourself. I'm also going to make sure to let you know once I'm done, if this is something you are interested in doing, exactly where to get the resources to give you the best chance of success. So, how did I make $500,000 by mistake? Well, I'm going to tell you right off the bat. That was from the first property that I ever purchased. I bought it for $117,000 when I was in my early 20s. It is currently worth somewhere north of $650,000. So if we were to make this title slightly more honest, it would be how I made $533,000 by mistake, and how you can do it as well. But you know what? 500 grand is plenty. So let's get started on the story behind this. And the way this happened is, for those of you who know me and know my story about getting into real estate investing, even getting into real estate investing wasn't something that I necessarily did on purpose. I did it out of necessity. I went to school for a degree in marketing management. That's a Bachelor of Commerce degree. I thought I was going to be in marketing. I really did. And a lot of people don't know this, but my first job out of school was a pharmaceutical sales rep. That's right. And that was a great marketing and sales job. And I remember I did the training with this guy who was, super smart, really aggressive, really fun guy. And then I got my own sort of my program. I had certain things that I had to sell to doctors, and I was driving 500 kilometers across the province to do it at the time. But I realized very quickly I hated my job. I really did. And I was like, what else can I do? Well, at the point of graduating university, I also, dabbled in real estate slightly. And again, it wasn't on purpose. It was out of necessity, because I was struggling. I was paying my own way through school. Unfortunately, my parents weren't able to pay for my tuition, so I had to get student loans. And a couple things that a lot of people don't realize about student loans is that, number one, your parents' household income has to be low to qualify, and number two is that when you get those student loans, a lot of it ends up not just going towards tuition, but towards housing expenses as well. Because I remember the frustration I had getting my student loan, of I had to show proof of enrollment in school, and to get proof of enrollment I had to pay my tuition, and I was like, but I'm applying for a student loan because I need money for the tuition. So I had to use all of my savings and everything I had from my summer jobs to make that first payment of my tuition. I ended up having to pay my tuition before I would get my student loan. And therefore, by the time I got my student loan, I was using that to pay my rent. I realized after 3 years of going away to school that I had spent approximately $500 a month for 3 years, which is $18,000 in rent. And most of that came from my student loan. It was crazy. And I was running out of money by the end of school, because the scholarship was only for the first 2 years. After that, I had to pay my full way. I was working full time and going to school the whole time I was in school. And it wasn't until I got really desperate in my last year of education that I realized I need to do something different. I talked to real estate agents. I talked to everybody who I thought would have an in on a way to get cheaper rent. And I eventually did meet a real estate agent who was a client of mine. I worked as a waiter, and she would come in. I always saw her with a lot of clients signing deals. She was a good tipper. And I joked with her. I said, "Hey, any chance one of these people you're selling a house to might have a room for a guy who was pretty handy?" I'm like, "I can help around the house for cheap rent. I can cut the grass. I can do paint. I can do minor renovations." I was like basically bartering for a place to rent. And she said something funny to me. She said, "Honestly, Scott, if you want to be able to afford to live in this town, you should consider buying a house instead of renting one." And I kind of laughed it off. Yeah, that's real funny. In my head, I'm like, this lady's crazy. What's she talking about? And then she was, she got pretty serious about it. She would start showing me properties. She'd come in at lunch. She'd be like, "Scott, check this out. I've got a listing here. It would be perfect for you." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm dreaming of home ownership one day." And she said, "Let me explain something to you." And I said, "Okay." I'm like, "That's fair. I'm ready to learn." She started showing me this property she had, which was fairly close to campus. It was on the bus route anyway. It looked really nice. It was actually a lot nicer looking than I thought she was going to show me, because I was used to seeing junky student rental properties. And she said, "This is a single family home. It's got 3 bedrooms upstairs. It's got a basement with a separate entrance. And it's already got a rec room and a living room and a little kitchenette downstairs. It's got a rough-in for a bathroom." She said, "Basically, you'd be looking at potentially 5 bedrooms here." And I said, "Yeah, for sure. I see it right away." And she said, "It's listed for, $125,000. I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's more money than I could have ever imagined at that age." I'm like, 125. Who has $125,000? It's a crazy amount of money. And then she said, "Well, if you get a mortgage and you rent out the other rooms," and we started to run through the numbers. And she said, "The mortgage, the taxes, and the insurance will run you close to $1,600 a month. And if you're renting out the rooms for $500 a month and you live in one of them, you'd still be getting $2,000 a month for those 4 extra rooms, which would cover all of your expenses and even pay you some money." I was like, "That is crazy. How is that possible that I can live here and actually it's more affordable than renting a house by renting out the other rooms to my friends?" I was just in shock. I thought that home ownership would be the most expensive thing and that renting was the affordable alternative. But I just learned that renting a place is more expensive than owning one. It was a shock to me. I thought, how have I not learned this? I've been in school getting a Bachelor of Commerce degree for the last few years, and I have not been taught this at all. So I took her up on the opportunity to go look at these properties and went and saw a few. Really liked that first one I looked at. Ended up trying to get financing, and that didn't work out well. Got a quick lesson in the fact that you need some money to buy a property. At least I thought so. And I had to actually go to a couple different banks and a couple different brokers before somebody helped me realize that there was a way for me to buy a property using part of my student loan as a down payment. Because this house was going to be my primary residence, I only needed 5% down. But it could also be a rental property. There's nothing that says your primary residence can't be a rental property. So 5% down on a $125,000 property was about $7,500, which was a good portion of my student loan. But I had been spending my student loan on rent anyway. So I figured, why not use $7,500 of my student loan on a down payment on a property where I'll never pay rent again? I'll in fact be getting paid every month. I'll be making $400 a month versus using $7,500 to pay $500 a month in rent. And in 15 months from now, that money will be gone anyway, and I'll have nothing to show for it. The logical answer was to buy a property and to use my student loan to do it. So despite the fact that my friends, my family, even my roommates, who I said, "Guys, if we pitch in together and buy this house, we'll save money. Are you in?" They said, "No." I said, "If I buy it, will you rent the rooms from me?" They said, "Absolutely." I'm like, what is wrong with people? I mean, I realized I can't follow the conventional wisdom. I got to follow the numbers. I ended up buying this property despite the fact that most people that I knew thought it was a crazy idea. I bought the property because it was an affordable way for me to live. And there was an opportunity to bring in a little bit of cash flow, which I thought would be great. A little bit of extra money every month could really go a long way for a guy like me. But that's it. That's all that I knew. Outside of that, I was learning about mortgages. I didn't fully understand them. In fact, I'm sure most of you don't understand them. I'd be super surprised if anybody even knew what what the math behind a mortgage calculation looked like, because it is a very complicated equation. I was frustrated that I was about to make one of the largest financial decisions of my life, and I was taking a business program that didn't prepare me for it at all. I even remember going to my economics professor and I said, listen, I can tell you the angle of a triangle with, very limited variables. I know Pythagorean's theorem. I said, I'm really excited that we've got some of these micro and macroeconomics challenges ahead of us. I said, but when are we going to learn about mortgages? And I'll never forget what he said. He said, you'll learn about a mortgage when you buy your first house. And that's when I realized that I was going to school to learn how to be a worker, not how to be a wealthy individual. We have one of the greatest education systems in the world at creating jobs and employment, but we don't teach people how to be wealthy. And I think that's where most people struggle in life, is we make this false connection that, just having a job or having an employment guarantees wealth. And it doesn't. It guarantees that you have a chance to be middle class, but it doesn't necessarily give you the opportunity to do things extraordinary. And my first step into real estate, again, my goal was to have an affordable place to live close to campus, be able to rent out the other rooms so that it covered all of my costs, including the principal and interest portion of my mortgage, which was really important. I needed that entire mortgage payment to be covered. And the bonus was a little bit of cash flow. That's how I secured my first property, under that premonition. What ended up happening, I guess you could say, was a mistake, but a very good one, is that property started to go up in value. And it started to go up in value by 5% a year, 12% some years. There were some years where it didn't go up at all, or even maybe went down a little bit. But today, 20 years after buying that property, which I ended up purchasing for $117,000, today that property is appraised somewhere around $650,000, which is an increase of $533,000, something that was not done intentionally. So it's very fair to say that I made over $500,000 by mistake. Shortly after buying this property, I realized it was going up in value. In fact, when my mortgage came up for renewal a year later, I realized that it was worth more than I originally purchased it for, because my broker said, do you not only want to refinance, do you want to potentially have it reappraised? Sorry, he said, do you not only want to renew your mortgage, do you want to refinance your mortgage? So when my mortgage came up for renewal, I had the opportunity not just to renew my mortgage, but to refinance my mortgage, meaning have it upped to the new value so that I could pull some equity out. Again, something I had not learned in school, something I didn't know existed, but I was able to pull almost $30,000 of equity out of this first property just a year later, after putting $7,500 down as a down payment a year before. I realized when I did this that, holy smokes, there are some huge opportunities in real estate that I didn't even know existed. Now I had money to buy my second and third property, which is exactly what I did. 1 year after buying my first, I bought my second and third. Now I had 3 investment properties, and I did the same thing with those 2. I did a few little upgrades to them. I rented them out. They went up in value. I pulled equity out of them to buy more. So I have used what is now, as I call, passive appreciation as a massive tool for real estate investing. And nowadays, I calculate this, we predict it. You absolutely should be using deal analyzers in order to forecast these types of things. And I do have a few things available if you'd like to use some of the deal analyzers that I use, or you'd like to use the prediction models that I have. You can go to scottmcgillivray.com to see how to access some of the things that I use now in a more sophisticated way. But back when I started, I didn't have a lot of opportunities to calculate these things beyond what I knew myself. So here I am with my first property. I've now refinanced it. I've been able to pull some equity out and buy my second and third property. I'm feeling pretty good about this. And, the people who were telling me that I was crazy to get into real estate, we're now changing the word crazy to lucky. They're like, you're lucky you got into real estate, and you got lucky in real estate. And I kind of took offense to that, to be honest. I mean, I get it. There's some luck involved in market appreciation and passive appreciation. But I'm also of the mind that luck is a tool for the prepared. You can't get lucky if you don't do anything, because there's nothing to get lucky about. And it's hard to say that, it's hard to say that you plan on the value of real estate to go up. And people talk about this to me all the time and ask me questions like, when do I buy and get out? When do I, buy low, sell high? How do I do these things? And the truth is, it's impossible to predict exactly what's going to happen, especially the longer term we get, the more variables that come into play. But history is the best indicator of the future. And if you look at the history of real estate, you see that the real estate market goes up and down all the way up. It's like a yo-yo on an escalator, right? There's little things that impact the value of real estate, but over the long term, it continues to go up and up and up. And if you ask your parents what the average house price was when they were kids, I'm sure it's a lot less than it is now. And if you ask your grandparents what the average housing prices were when they bought their first house, it's probably significant less than what your parents paid. So I think the pattern is pretty clear. I've analyzed this many times with national data and even local data, but if you look at average housing prices over time, often when there is something major that happens that pushes the price of real estate down, we've had market crashes, we've had housing crashes, we've had pandemics. All of these things have put pressure on the real estate market. But nowhere in history, even the Great Depression, but nowhere in history has real estate not fully recovered and surpassed its last peak. Meaning that as long as you have a long-term strategy in real estate spanning a minimum of, let's say, 5 to 10 years, your chances of the value of your property going up are significantly higher the longer you plan on holding them. In fact, I don't think there's been any downturn in real estate that has not fully recovered within a 10 to 12 year period, maximum. So even worst case scenario, it takes about 12 years for properties' values to correct. But if you are a sophisticated investor, while they're correcting, you should be getting cash flow, right? Just like I was on my first property. Your mortgage should be covered by the rental income. So theoretically, you're getting paid to wait. And that's just a couple of the ways you can make money in real estate. I don't want to get into all the different ways to make money in real estate right now, because that in itself is its own podcast, and it will be coming. I can promise you that. But I do want to talk about how you can make these big chunks of money. This is the most amount of money that real estate investors typically make, is through, and I'm going to name it now, this $500,000 that was made by mistake was made through passive appreciation. The value of a property going up over time based on market conditions. There isn't a lot you can do to influence this. There's also something called forced appreciation, which again is a little bit different. That's the idea of you physically doing something to a property to increase its value. So how can you do this on purpose? Well, you do have to follow these specific steps. Number one, you make sure that you've got positive cash flow on the property. That's the key to being able to hold on to it for a long period of time through all the ups and downs. You're getting paid to wait. But I'll tell you right now, that first house that I bought, I have not put a lot of money into that house. I bought it 20 years ago. You know, $400 a month in positive cash flow is about $4,800 a year. I probably reinvested that $4,800 for the first 3, 4, 5 years. Today, my rents are much higher. Today, I believe I am renting that house out for about $3,400 a month. That's where rental rates are today. But my purchase price was still the same, which is fantastic. The second thing is to make sure that you are having the rental income cover your mortgage payment. That's both principal and interest. That way, the property doesn't cost you anything. All your expenses should be covered, both your principal and interest, and your insurance, property taxes, and any other expenses that you have. Now, I want to give you a little bit of math on this so you can wrap your head around what's been going on with this property, because I want to make sure that if you are using one of the deal analyzers that I use, from which you can find on my website, or whatever you're using to do your calculations, that you do this correctly. You see, the first thing that's important to note with the calculations that I use is that all of my expenses are considered against the rent coming in, meaning my principal and interest of my mortgage, my insurance, my property taxes. Even on this first property, I had a few appliance rentals that I included in there, and so that was fully covered. And at the time, interest rates on mortgages were around 6 or 7%, which explains why the payments were a little higher on the mortgage. But the key is, the principal portion and the interest portion of the mortgage were covered. Remember, the interest is the cost of financing. That's an actual expense. But the principal balance that's being paid down, I'm not even talking about that money here today. But to give you an idea, the actual principal portion of my mortgage was paid off in approximately 10 years. After 10 years of having this rental property, and I should note, I lived in this for 10 years as well. I stayed in this house till I was almost 30 years old. I lived in this rental property because it was affordable. I was saving a lot of money. I was using the equity to buy more properties. I didn't want to buy a primary residence all to myself because it wouldn't cash flow. So I stayed in my own rental apartment, living in the smallest bedroom in the basement for almost 10 years in order to maximize my cash flow. And that's what allowed me to pay this house off in 10 years. Now, the key to paying it off in 10 years was the fact that since it's an investment property, there isn't a huge benefit in having it paid off. You aren't able to take advantage of a lot of the tax implications. So once it was paid off, I had a new line of credit put in place for 80% loan to value of the property, which at that time was about $350,000. So a few semantics there, but important to note that I do continuously leverage the equity out of my properties in order to buy more properties. The other thing about this passive appreciation to note is that even though this was made almost by mistake, I now calculate that. And if you're using a deal analyzer or some pro forma in order to project out what you're going to make on passive appreciation, I typically use 3% as a base indicator. So I average out that I'm hoping to have the market go up by about 3% a year. Now, some years it'll be 10%, some years it'll be 0. There's even the chance it might be negative, but 3% is a pretty realistic and conservative way of calculating your passive appreciation. The third thing you want to make sure is that you put yourself in the path of success, meaning you give yourself the opportunity, the best possible opportunity, to take advantage of passive appreciation by being in the areas that are most poised for it. And I'll tell you how to do that, because I think that's important as well. So setting yourself up for the most possible passive appreciation, here's what you can do. Draw a line, number one, between the downtown core of the town or the city that you're looking at and the following 5 spots. Number one, all the post-secondary education institutions, colleges, universities, campuses. Second, draw a line from downtown to all the major hospitals. Draw a line from downtown to the top 5 largest employers in the area. Draw a line from downtown to the next largest city. And then I would draw a line from downtown to all the transportation hubs, meaning like airports or subway stations, things like that. Anywhere along these lines are going to be your best opportunities for growth. And the more you move towards some of these institutions or hospitals or employers, the more expensive properties will typically get, but the continued or opportunity for passive appreciation is there. So this is how you get passive appreciation on purpose, which is key here. You want the property values to go up as much as possible. So you have to put yourself in the way of growth. That's what I'm trying to help you with here. And then you can plug your numbers into your deal analyzer and see where it gets you. The last thing you need to do, and this is the easiest of all, is just keep the property as long as possible. Don't sell it. Keep it. Another exciting fact about my first property is that I still have it. I still have my first property. It's not only is it a good investment, but it's a bit of an experiment. I want to see where it goes. Do I manage it myself? Absolutely not. I haven't met tenants in that property in over 10 years. I have no idea who's renting it. My property manager does everything, which is key. The only time I have stepped foot in that property was about 3 years ago. And it's because I was filming a show called Moving the McGillivrays. This was a show about us moving from our first house as a family to the house we're currently in that we built. And it dawned on me that I never want to kind of forget where I started, and I wanted my kids to get an idea of where I started as well, so that they maybe don't take things for granted. So I took the whole family to my house, my first house I ever bought, and while it was rented but unoccupied for part of the summer, I went in, had a walk around. I showed the kids my bedroom. I showed them the kitchen and bathroom area and they were in shock. They're like, "You lived right here in just this?" I'm like, "Yep." And I absolutely loved it. I would do it all over again if I had to. But beyond it being kind of nostalgic and also a good investment, it's a good example. It's a good example and a good reminder that the most powerful tool in real estate investing is time, meaning time in the market. I've said it before, but acquiring properties and keeping them over a long period of time is where the big money is in real estate. Cash flow is good. Principal recapture is good. Forced appreciation is good. All these things are good. But the most money you will make in real estate is long-term passive appreciation. This is where legacy wealth comes into play. This is where you build enough money to change the financial future, not just for yourself, but for your entire family. And if you can imagine that one property can go up by $500,000, imagine what a portfolio of 10 or 20 properties can do for you. That's the magic of real estate, is that it's scalable and it's exponential what the growth looks like versus the time invested in doing this. And I would love to say that buy and hold is completely passive. It's mostly passive, but there are things to do. So a couple considerations here before you just jump in and start buying things and hoping they're going to go up in value, this is the icing on the cake. This might be the best part about real estate investing, but it's not the reason why you buy them in the first place. You need to make sure that they have positive cash flow so you can hold on to them long term. That cash flow is what sustains. You do want to make sure that your principal is being paid down as a portion of the income coming in, because that's a key way to increase your wealth as well. It's nice to, if there's a way for you to force appreciation, that's doing a value added renovation. You want to think about that as well. But you don't want to spend all your time working on these places. So passive appreciation is the key to having wealth accumulate over time without continuously putting in more money. That is the absolute key here. Now, there's other strategies in real estate, but I want to remind you that the buy and hold method is the only way to acquire that passive appreciation over time. Flips are fun, but I always say flips are flings, buy and hold is your lover, right? Flips they're quick, they're exciting, they can generate some good energy and a little bit of profit, but they are missing that key long-term element, which is that passive appreciation. And you can only get that by looking at the long-term picture. So let me wrap this up in a way that makes a lot of sense, because you guys know that I love the buy and hold method. You also know that I've dabbled in other real estate investing opportunities from time to time. But as I said, I'm married to the buy and hold method. I've had flings with all the other techniques out there, but I'm always going to come back to this idea that the true wealth in real estate is in the long term. And if this is something that you would like for yourself, you need to start doing long-term planning. The only way that you're going to be able to generate wealth through real estate, through the buy and hold method, is if you start forecasting. You got to start looking at what are my goals and what is my life financially going to look like in 12 months from now, in 1 year from now. Just start there. It's one step at a time, right? In 1 year from now, where am I going to be? In 3 years from now, where am I going to be? In 5 years from now, what's this going to look like? And you can use deal analyzers. You can use mortgage calculators to help you get these numbers. But I also want to reveal a bit of a secret here that that is a story I constantly go back to. It's something that I learned a long time ago. And a lot of people think that, a lot of these ideas and tips and tricks are invented or read in textbooks somewhere, and they're not. These have been done before. We are just repeating the most successful parts of past success, right? And I remember the first time I ever did a public presentation on real estate investing. I had just finished filming the first season of Income Property. It had just gone on the air, and the network and the home show asked me to do a live presentation at the home show. And I was really nervous because, I'd been investing in real estate for several years, and I had taught a lot of friends and family how to do it, but I'd never really done a major public speaking event. And I got up in front of a crowd of people at the home show, and I remember that I was speaking right after somebody who was talking about the get rich quick. He had a presentation about how to get rich quick and how to flip a house for property and how to wholesale this stuff and that stuff. And I was like, wow, this guy's really exciting. And he's talking about all these fast ways to make money in real estate. And then it was my turn to get on stage. And my presentation was about get rich slow, buy and hold. And I was like, oh no, everyone's going to be upset because I have this get rich slow strategy. And I went up and I talked about acquiring properties and keeping them over a long period of time and having cash flow and passive appreciation, all of these things. And I remember saying specifically, I was wrapping it up the same way I'm wrapping it up today, about the idea that you need to have a plan. You need to have not just a 1 year plan, but a 5-year plan or a longer term plan. And I just, because I was reading my notes and I was nervous, I remember saying, you have to have a plan. And, does everyone here have a plan? And, some people kind of put up their hands and stuff. And I said, what's your 10-year plan? And I just kind of looked and pointed to the person in front of me in the front row. And I'm like, sir, what's your 10-year plan? And as the words came out of my mouth, I realized I was speaking to a 90-year-old man. And I asked this man what his 10-year plan was. And he looked at me and I was like, oh my gosh, this is where you've put your foot in your mouth. Right. And, uh, and he just kind of shrugged his shoulders. And I was like, well, we all need to think about our long-term plan. And then I went straight to, does anyone have any questions? And interestingly enough, he put up his hand for a question, and I avoided it at first. I'm like, he's going to be mad at me. I just asked him what his long-term plan is. And I took a few questions, and I said, I'll be here. If anyone else has any other questions, I'll stick around and answer them later. And he came up afterwards, and he was very patient. He let a few other people ask their thing. And then finally, it was time. It was time to address the situation. And I said, I sort of smiled. I said, yes, sir. I said, you've been very patient. Can I help you? And he said, I listened to your entire presentation today. And I have to tell you, from a young guy like yourself, it was one of the smartest things I've ever heard. And I said, okay, well, I feel better. I said, do you mind elaborating? And he said, I actually came here today because I've watched your show, and on your show, you tell people the value of their house after you do the work. So you must know how to tell the value of properties. I said, well, yeah, I use appraisers, but there are some things that we can do to get a value. And he said, I have a property that I would like to know the value of, and I was wondering if you could help me. And I said, sure, tell me about it. And he told me where it was. And he said, it's a property that I bought when I was 18 years old. It's got 6 units. He's like, I bought it when I was new to this country. I just immigrated here, and I was working in a factory, and I needed somewhere to live. And my manager said to me, he said, before you go and rent a place, I suggest you go and look at buying a place. And he said, okay. He's like, my manager was the smartest person I knew. So I did what he told me, and I went and looked at properties. And my manager then said to me, if it's got more than 5 units, I'll give you the money to buy it, and then you'll pay me back. So he went to look at places with more than 5 units, and he bought a place with 6 units, and he lived in one of them, and he charged rent in all the other units and was able to pay back his manager who lent him the money. Now, interestingly enough, he had to buy a place that was slightly on the outskirts of town. Here we are, 70 somewhat years later. It is now in the middle of downtown. I'll never forget what this older gentleman told me. He said that he bought this 6-unit building for $1,200. I did call up one of my agents, and I also had a connection with an appraiser, and I did have his property reappraised for him at $3.5 million. And that was a huge lesson for me. I remember saying to him, once I told him it's worth $3.5 million, I'm like, wow, did you ever make a good decision? He said, you know what? When I first bought the place, everyone said, what are you doing buying the place? This is crazy. And then it went up in value. And he's like, and I only bought it because I needed somewhere to live. He's like, and it went up in value, and everyone's like, you're a genius. You should sell it. It's gone up in value. And he said, but I needed somewhere to live. He said, but then there was like a world war, and, and the market went down, and everyone's like, you're an idiot. You should have sold it. And he said, but I need somewhere to live. He's like, and then it went up. And then I got married, and then it went down, and we had kids, and then it went up, and we traveled the world, and I had a career. He went on and on, told me his life story. And he said, and I still have the property today. And he said, the only thing I wanted to know is what it's worth so I could know what I'm leaving for my children. That's what he said to me. I said, wow. I said, I'll give you the $1,200 you bought it for if you want to just straight up get your money back. And we had a good chuckle. And I'll never forget that this guy bought a house for bought a sixplex for $1,200. And over a 70-year period of time, it went up to $3.5 million. And it was always just a smart place for him to live where all of the expenses were being covered. And that's the lesson that I took from that, and that I would pass on to other people as well, because life's too short to learn from your own mistakes and your own wins. You got to learn from someone else's. And this was one gentleman that I definitely learned something from, and I've stuck to it. And it's proved to be pretty lucrative. And, you know, dare I say, that's how I made $500,000 by mistake. But truthfully, you should be making this money on purpose by putting yourself in the position to be lucky. I never underestimate how fortunate I am, and that, hard work has paid off. I definitely could have gone down many different roads, but the things that I have learned from what I've done, I'm happy to share. And I hope that in some capacity, this reminds you why you should start investing in real estate, or why the decision that you've made has been a good one. And if you're looking for more information about how to analyze properties to put yourself in this position, go to scottmcgillivray.com. Everything real estate investing there should be able to help you out. Make sure you subscribe, because, again, there is just so much to talk about. This is just the beginning. And if you're like me and you're addicted to real estate, then you've found a good place. I'm Scott McGillivray. Thanks for listening. This has been The Real Estate Rebel, and we'll talk to you soon.